So, as part of my morning routine during the week, I like to open up my podcast app and listen to Keith Olbermann stroke out. I like Keith. I do. If I didn't, I wouldn't listen to his Countdown podcast as regularly as I do. I agree with Keith on nearly everything politically. I appreciate how clearly and passionately he lays out the stakes of our upcoming presidential election here in the United States, how bluntly he articulates the threat posed to democracy by Donald Trump and his supporters and enablers. But sometimes Keith is a lot, you know? The passion, by which I mean the shouting and hyperventilating to which Keith is prone, is good, but Keith can also get carried away by it. And when that happens, it doesn't do him or the causes he champions, which are usually also the causes that I champion, any favors. Plus, he has this weird obsession with typos and misspellings and mispronunciations. And I get it, he's going after right-wingers and he figures any avenue of attack is fair, no matter how petty or pedantic. But I must tell you, even when it's a Republican that does it, I don't give a shit about typographical errors or incorrect spellings or mispronunciations of words, unless it's a very specific case where it seems to illustrate stubborn ignorance or a willful insult on the part of the person saying it. Like when right-wingers make a point of saying Kamala Harris's first name wrong, or it's being done to point out the hypocrisy of Republicans who relentlessly try to paint Joe Biden as cognitively impaired because of his verbal gaffes, while ignoring the fact that Donald Trump can barely make it through a sentence without it deteriorating into wilted word salad. Other than in situations such as those, making a big deal about correcting someone else's spelling or pronunciation or whatever only serves to make you seem like a supercilious dick who is focusing on the wrong things. Just because they're actual Nazis, that doesn't mean you should be a grammar Nazi, Keith. Really. Having said all of that, when Olbermann nails it, he tends to fucking nail it. Such was the case last week, Thursday, February 15th, to be precise, when he devoted the opening segment of his podcast to an extended commentary about America's epidemic of gun violence. If you haven't heard that episode of Olbermann's podcast, I highly recommend you give a listen at least to that first segment. Much of what I'm about to say is inspired by it, but Keith says a lot more than what I'm going to say, and not everything I'm going to say is going to be a response to what Keith said. So if you find this of some interest or use, you might also find what Keith Olbermann had to say on the subject of interest or use. Again, it's the February 15, 2024 episode of the Countdown with Keith Olbermann podcast. That commentary I'm referring to was inspired by the shooting that took place last week on Valentine's Day during the Kansas City Chiefs Super Bowl victory parade in Kansas City, Missouri. 23 people were shot, one of whom, a local radio DJ named Lisa Lopez Galvan, later died. As of the time I'm making this video, there are still but few details known to the general public. Police have 2 juvenile suspects in custody and believe the shooting was not intended as an act of terrorism or political violence, but was the result of a personal dispute. In the United States, where it is estimated there are over 393 million firearms in civilian possession, there are nearly 70,000 more firearms in civilian possession than there are civilians in this country. A personal dispute can become a mass shooting event in a matter of moments. It's the country in which we live. It's the country in which we, collectively, have chosen to live. Olbermann drops a few key phrases in his commentary on the subject. The first is his rechristening of the gun lobby as the death lobby. I don't think there's a better way to say that. Despite a recent decline in its financial fortunes following revelations of misconduct and fraud from its top executives, the NRA maintains a stranglehold on gun policy in the United States. Zealous Second Amendment advocates and gun manufacturers have the power to essentially regulate themselves. The result of that is over 40,000 gun-related deaths a year, a number of gun deaths per capita that is unrivaled in the rest of the developed world. One reason the state of affairs is allowed to continue, is not just allowed to continue, but actively perpetuated, is that gun violence is profitable. Sales of firearms go up in the aftermath of mass shootings. Other countries that have experienced horrific acts of mass murder involving guns have seized those opportunities to reform their laws, to tighten their regulations, to give up their guns. In the United States, we take such opportunities to buy more guns, which manufacturers and dealers are happy to sell us because why the fuck should they care about murdered children or murdered teachers or murdered attendees of churches, mosques, or synagogues so long as there's a good buck in it? There's something else Olbermann says in his podcast commentary that I was especially gratified to hear because I've also been saying it for years. There's no such thing as a responsible gun owner. Almost 400 million privately owned firearms in the United States. 40,000 gun-related deaths a year, more than half of which are suicides, most of the rest of which are murders, with accidental gun deaths rounding out the total. A personal dispute at a parade escalating into a mass shooting. More mass shooting incidents than there are days in the year for the last 4 years running. The guns are the problem. We keep being told that this is complicated. It's a mental health issue. It's a safety issue. But the cause itself is not complicated. It couldn't be simpler. And it couldn't be more obvious. It's the guns. There are too many guns in the hands of too many people. That is the problem. If you have guns in your home, you are part of the problem. Some gun owners fancy themselves heroes in waiting. They live in states where they're allowed to carry their guns in public, and they imagine that if there's ever trouble, while they're around, they'll be able to save the day like some folk hero out of the Old West. They will be the mythical good guy with a gun. That's a self-flattering fantasy. Others believe they are preparing for a civil war against the forces of the deep state or socialism or the forces of the Illuminati or whatever right-wing fever dream they cling to in order to make their militia group feel like something other than summer camp with live rounds. When Joe Biden finally sends the army to start rounding people up into FEMA camps, because Barack Obama was supposed to, but I guess he just forgot, these brave Christian soldiers will fight back in defense of liberty. Self-flattering fantasy to the point of delusion. Most frustrating of all are those on the left who think they're arming for a revolution. Leftists need to arm themselves so we're ready when the revolution comes, which it definitely will, and I will definitely fight in it. I can't be bothered to vote, but I will absolutely show up when it's time to shoot and be shot at. And once the revolution is over, and we win, obviously, we'll get rid of capitalism and do things better from then on. Good luck. I hope you don't all get killed. You seem like nice, well-meaning people, some of you. But a self-flattering fantasy with a noble goal is no less a self-flattering fantasy and no more of an excuse for contributing to the gun problem. Okay, that last bit wasn't entirely fair. Many pro-gun leftists do also vote. Many gun owners don't fall into any of those three categories. They hunt, or they shoot for sport, or they think they need a gun in the house, or strapped to their body when they leave the house for protection. Many of them have undergone firearms training to be able to handle their guns safely, and they store their guns at home securely. I'm glad. That's good. You know what will be even better? If they didn't have the guns in the first place. Every gun owner is a responsible gun owner until they're not. The term gun owner reminds me of the final key phrase from Olbermann's commentary that sticks in my brain. In that commentary, he challenges the very notion of there being any such thing as a gun owner in the United States. Because here in the United States, we don't own our guns. We are owned by them. Theoretically, guns are meant to protect us, but in reality, we protect them. We defend them. We sacrifice our safety, our peace of mind, our bodies, our lives, our children's bodies and lives for them. How else can you describe a country like this? A country where 40,000 people a year die gun-related deaths, where there are more mass shootings than days in the year, where there have been more school shootings in the last 20 years than any of us can remember without looking it up, where just last month, in the aftermath of a deadly school shooting in Iowa, Donald Trump told a crowd that the shooting was terrible, but they needed to get over it and move on. Donald Trump, who refuses to ever get over and move on from anything, who is the presumptive presidential nominee for one of our two major political parties, speaking in a state that just had a school shooting and telling people to get over it with no fear of paying any political cost whatsoever for saying that. How else can you describe a country like this than to say that guns own us? There are all sorts of ways we can start to fix this problem. Tighter gun control regulations at the federal level, continuous buyback programs to encourage gun owners to turn in their guns, police reform, including demilitarizing police departments and disarming most police, ending immunity for gun manufacturers so they can be held responsible for negligence in the way they produce and sell their products. The list goes on and on. But the truth is, none of that's going to happen until enough of us decide it needs to happen. None of it's going to happen until enough of us decide that gun manufacturers and Second Amendment extremists don't get to call their own plays anymore. The truth is that 40,000 deaths, hundreds of mass shootings, and children being murdered in their classrooms will continue to happen every year until we decide that guns owning us is too steep a price to pay for so many of us owning them.